or welcome back if you've been here before. My name is Beth Ann, and today I want to talk about this absolute chunker of a book, pretty thick, 710 pages, that I picked up in a bookstore on a total whim just because I really thought the cover was gorgeous. It's showing up a little bit blurry here because this is just my laptop camera, but it's really beautiful in person, I promise. And I love a good chunky book. So I got it, I read it, I loved it. It also drove me crazy. So we're going to talk a little bit about both of those things. So what do we have here? So Yu Miri is a Korean author living in Japan and writing in Japanese. And this book is sort of a family history of how she got there. She's a minor character in the start of the book. As she is preparing to run a marathon, she is remembering and feeling in touch with one of her ancestors who was a marathon runner, her grandfather, who was a marathon runner in Korea around the time of World War II, and immediately after that. And she early in the book she goes to Korea and she goes through a ceremony to be in touch with your ancestors and to commune with your ancestors. And in that ceremony, her ancestors are basically clamoring for their story to be told. And so then she's telling their story through this book. And so it's a little bit based in some of the history of her family, but I believe also sort of fictionalized because she's developing these family members in as like fully fleshed characters in a way that is not like a strict biographical narrative. And this book it was poignant and beautiful on so many levels. I mean, first of all, just the writing. The writing was absolutely incredible in this book. And it was a mix of really evocative descriptions of Korea, of town life, of country life, of the food, of the clothing, for that period of time. She just describes it so beautifully and really sets the scene really, really well. And then there's experimental writing in this book. So because running was such a theme in her family, it was her grandfather and her grandfather's brother who were both competitive runners on the national and international stage. And so some of the chapters are just told as like stream of consciousness as somebody is running. The first we get some of Yu Miri herself doing that as she's training for her marathon at the beginning of the book in the modern era, and then we also get her grandfather and her grandfather's brother doing that at different times through the story. And it's written. I tabbed one of those, and I'm going to hold it up, even though I know it's impossible to see, but there's no punctuation except that she's written inhale, exhale periodically, like very frequently throughout the text. And so as you're reading, you kind of get that sense of like, what if this person was talking to me, or even when you're thinking and you're on a run and your thoughts are just kind of broken up by that constant need to breathe. So I really liked that experimental fiction piece, and I thought she actually did a really good job where it's a little bit more prevalent a little earlier in the novel. So you kind of get set up for who these characters are, and you get set up for that type of writing, and then it appears a little more sporadically and strategically later through the book. So that was executed really well. I also, in terms of thinking about the quality of the writing and the experience of reading this book, I just feel like I need to put in my plug in defense of human translators. And Willow from the channel Willow Talks Books did a wonderful video about translation in the age of AI that I'll try to remember to link to if you want to go read it. But basically the idea that some publishing companies are replacing human translators with AI translators. And what do we lose when that happens? And for a book like this, that is, I mean, it's a family saga. It's complex and it's emotional and it's dealing with nuances of Korean history from a very politically complicated time in Korean history, and it's dealing with it's showing the culture like constantly throughout this book. And so that comes through with things like very intentional decisions about which words to translate from Korean and which words to leave in Korean that are, names of clothing and food and things like that. And I should have mentioned early on This was translated by Morgan Giles, so kudos to the translator. And then a piece that I found really impactful was because so much trauma happened to this family, because we're talking about World War II, we're talking about Japanese occupation, we're talking about the division into South Korea and North Korea, and just hugely traumatic at every level, from the national scale down to the individual scale. And something that I thought the narrator did so well was, sometimes, even though our characters are Korean and their thoughts and experiences are translated into English for the reader, sometimes the character is just grieving so intensely, and those moments were not translated. And so you get sort of the sense of like wailing, you get a sense of the performative grief in a way, because that snippet, it might be a sentence or something that isn't translated into Korean. And so I thought that was really powerful for just evoking the awful period of what's happening to these characters. So it's really, all of that to say, it's very hard to imagine an AI doing that convincingly. So hooray for human translators. Okay, so those were some of my points. Those are some of the things I loved about this book. Now, some of the things that drove me crazy. This book is 710 pages long. I think it could have been 400 and been equally effective. It maybe could have even been 300. Part of the reason is because I think the book starts out really strongly with, I think, what the author might have been trying to do, which is to unpack some of her family's history and to tell this really emotional, really intimate family story in the context of this much broader national and international period in history. So she does that really well. The beginning of the book, but then a little more than halfway through, we introduce just like a totally random main character who has nothing to do with the family. She's a little girl who sees Yu Miri's grandfather's brother running and has a crush on him. And it ends up being really tragic because they're in an occupied nation, occupied by the Japanese, and there are few opportunities, and she's 13 and she doesn't know what she's doing. She is actually basically kidnapped and put into a house of prostitution near the battle lines for soldiers. And so we get several points of view chapters detailing her experience. And towards the end of the book, she does have one more encounter with one of the more typical main characters of the book. But it was, I hate to say that I didn't like it in this book, because it was impactful and important, and those points of view chapters were beautifully done for just illustrating this horrible human impact from this period of history and from this conflict and from these actions by the perpetrators. But it's like, wait, now you're writing a different book than the book that you were writing. So that was frustrating. So that piece came in, and even though I don't even want to say that I enjoyed reading it, because it was pretty awful to read, except that it was beautifully done, and like I said, a really important topic, but it felt like a different book for those pieces. So it is what it is. I kept reading it. I couldn't put it down, but I could easily see how that would be sort of a big turnoff for other people, potentially. So I guess kind of that tension of like, is it really sort of a family saga set in a particular historical period that we're getting bits of, or is it more focused on the military, political, economic things that were happening at that time, where the individual characters don't matter so much? They're just kind of being used to show what was happening at that time. So a little bit of a tension there. So this wasn't a 5-star book for me because, I could see those kind of issues with it that could be a little bit frustrating at times. But like I said, even though this thing was 710 pages, I could not put it down. Like, this was just so lush and moving, and I absolutely loved the experience of reading it, and just really drove home how poor my own education is, because World War II in history classes in the United States, it's all focused on what happened in Europe. And so I knew very little of the history that was happening here. I knew very little of the Communist Party in Korea during this period. I knew very little about the occupation by Japan. And it's definitely something that I want to rectify, and that this book went quite a ways towards rectifying, because she does get into quite a bit of the historical detail in here. So enjoyed this book with a few caveats. Would love to hear if anybody who makes it to the end of this video, have you read other books by this author, because she is very widely acclaimed. And some of her other books are quite well known, and I would really like to get to them. She's definitely a read again author, so would love to hear from anybody who's read some of her work. All right, thanks for sticking with me, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.